Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Walker. Really big fan of all your tweets, what you're building with Hello Moon. And so excited for this podcast episode.
Well, thank you. We're big fans of the podcast. We're also big fans of what you and Solana Legend are doing over at Frictionless. So excited to be on.
Appreciate it. I think we're both warriors of trying to fight the FUD, as there is a lot of. So definitely appreciate your help and support there as well.
Fight the FUD. They fight the FUD, spread the good word. You know, like we're like the modern missionaries, right? But anyway,
we try. But before kind of jumping into like a lot of like what you're building, I would love to learn a little bit more about you and kind of how you got involved in the crypto space.
Yeah, absolutely. So before founding Hello Moon, I'd spent almost a decade doing basically enterprise software, private equity. And so, I was on, a bunch of different board of directors and was just very involved with, I guess, at the beginning of my career, first thinking about investing and how do you invest successfully, et cetera. And then I realized kind of from there that, picking the right company at the right time, at the right valuation is important. But who's doing what? Post-investment is also important. So started to get more involved with the operations of our portfolio companies. And then over time realized that, the best way to control that was if, maybe it was me. And so started thinking pretty heavily about entrepreneurship, starting a business, et cetera. And basically kind of the conclusion was that, if I'm going to start a business and it's not in crypto, it's going to be legacy, sometime in the next 2-3 years. It was crypto was kind of a no-brainer.
Specifically on the crypto side, what got you so excited? I think it's kind of like a pretty deep rabbit hole once you get into it, and it's hard to get out. But I'm curious, like, were there any particular moments that you were like, all right, like this crypto stuff is going on and I have to be involved?
Yeah, so I guess I'll go back to the beginning of my experience with crypto, which is right after graduating. I was living in San Francisco, and one of my neighbors, who now is pretty well known, but back in the day was just some guy with a Bitcoin exchange, was Brian Armstrong, so he founded Coinbase and, was basically kind of back then, the way that I thought about it was like, Brian's like such a smart guy. Why does he want to dedicate his life to helping people buy and sell drugs on the Silk Road? So that was kind of like take one. And I think honestly, that was probably a pretty valid take back then. But kept watching pretty closely for a number of years. But I'd always thought of crypto as basically a way to do, exchange money anonymously on one hand, or on the other hand, speculate on prices and try to make money trading. And so what really kind of hooked me in was realizing that actually the reason more and more people were using crypto, the reason that, I was reading about it in the news every day, wasn't because people thought the price was going to go up, but because basically this was a new paradigm of computing, a new way of building, network effects among humans, and that, basically that kind of a new internet was being created. And so as soon as I realized that, like, it's kind of hard to look away, to your point. And so basically became obsessed. And if you're looking at and just kind of thinking about how does this relate to Solana, if you're thinking about crypto from the perspective of the future of computing, the future, a new version of the internet, et cetera, Solana itself was kind of a no-brainer. I mean, like, most scalable layer one by far. Really, like if that's your vision for crypto, there's really was only one option.
Yeah,
that's how I ended up on Solana.
Awesome. Was there any particular moment that got you excited, or did you kind of over time build up the conviction to make the jump? I personally got involved in 2017 and then just kept with it throughout the bear market and decided to go full time once the bull market started. But I'm curious about yourself. Yeah,
so I'd been increasingly curious. So I was thinking, I'd gone from thinking about crypto as a way to buy things anonymously on the internet or speculate on prices to the future of the internet, future of computing, et cetera. And then one day I joined the Solana NFT Discord, and that was like mind blowing. And I think it actually was Pesky Penguins. And I remember like everybody was yelling Newt, and everybody was yelling delist, and everybody was like screaming about people who were undercutting on the floor, and there was just such a clear, vibrant community of people who were like-minded and just having fun together, but also who were kind of circling around mutual financial alignment, which felt like it kind of amplified everything. And so that's what really hooked me into Solana, and like I would say like doubled my conviction. At the same time, I was kind of a little fed up with what I'd been doing in private equity, and was kind of felt like I was ready for something new. And I guess as these things go, I spent a week in Mykonos with some friends, and basically realized, hey, a lot of these people have founded their own company, and basically they ended up saying, hey, look, we'll back you to start a company. Doesn't matter if you don't have an idea. It doesn't matter, if you don't have a plan. So that caused me to like really double click into actually, starting a company on Solana, if you will.
Those are some good friends. Yeah, I would love to learn more. The Solana community, it was super vibrant. I kind of came at it from a technical approach and was really amazed by the capabilities. But when you decided to build Hello Moon, was there really any other kind of blockchains or ecosystems that you were evaluating at the time? Or after kind of some of your interactions with the early community on the NFT side, or were you just convinced from the community aspect?
No, so I definitely looked at other chains. And so what was interesting to me about Solana is, so I guess I kind of approached it in two ways. So the first thing that caught my attention about Solana was basically if your vision for crypto is that it's the future of the internet, mass adoption, et cetera, Solana is kind of the only layer one, at least today, that's viable. So that kind of caught my interest initially. And then the more that I learned about Solana, the more that I learned about Solana, the more that I realized there actually was a pretty interesting opportunity for startups on Solana. So as you know very well, Solana is fundamentally different from EVM in a number of ways. I think Solana's data model is probably the most pronounced difference. And so basically what I realized is that, if you were a big incumbent Ethereum data provider or an EVM data provider, you actually probably had a disadvantage building a data company on Solana relative to a startup. And so that kind of got me very interested, because I realized like, hey, I realized a few things. I realized, first of all, there's kind of a walled garden aspect that protects you from, competition from, big established players on other chains. But then also kind of Solana data is so complicated, and so basically it's almost like it's like a novel computer science problem in effect. And so I realized that the only way that a company was going to actually be able to do a good job with the data on Solana is if that company was built in kind of an institutional way. So this is not something that, like two guys and a dog in a basement could really make a dent on. You really needed an organization that was built to scale and that had, a team of software developers with basically institutional backgrounds. And so that also got me very excited. Basically, I realized that it's going to be very difficult for an EVM incumbent to do it, A, and B, it's going to be very difficult for kind of like a small, scrappy startup to do it. You're going to need something kind of in between. And that's what I'd spent, a decade doing. And so it felt like, it felt very interesting.
Definitely. No, I'm very appreciative of the product that you built with Hello Moon. I personally, just coming from the product background in tech, am very interested in the metrics and kind of following along with things that are happening on chain. And Hello Moon is a fantastic resource for that. So, and I'm particularly interested in like the unique signers. And so it's definitely helpful. Maybe.
Oh, actually,
go ahead.
On that front, I'm the same. So I've been very data focused, and when I was investing, and so I remember I was trying to put together a pitch book for Hello Moon. Which, by the way, if you're thinking about building a company, you don't need a pitch book. I've learned, but I was thinking about putting a pitch book together for Hello Moon, and I wanted to show how important the Solana market was, how fast it was growing, and why this was going to be an important product. And I wasn't able to find the number of users. I wasn't able to find the volume. Like back then, you really couldn't get data on Solana other than I guess price and volume of sold. And so that was that kind of like I was like, well, how can you have a $10 billion market cap entity with probably $10 billion of market cap internally, right? And not even have the most basic visibility into what's happening. So that was also kind of an interesting moment for me.
Definitely. And a great emphasis to start the company. So maybe talked a little bit about your background, how you got into crypto, and some of the insights that you had to kind of start the company. But maybe on a high level, could you touch upon what Hello Moon is, what your vision is, and what you want it ultimately to kind of become?
Yeah, absolutely. So Hello Moon is basically a data infrastructure company. So when I think about, what is our core product, our core product really is highly flexible data infrastructure. And so for people who are big into Solana NFTs or who are in the Solana, ecosystem, they're probably familiar with our website, hellomoon.io. The reality is that that's actually the only part of our business that we're not monetizing. We have, 10-15% of our engineering resources on it. And what we're really focused on is basically vending this flexible data infrastructure to businesses that are on Solana, businesses that want to be on Solana, businesses that are interested in Solana, to help them engage with the blockchain, to help them plan their business, to help them think about getting new customers or developing a product that wouldn't be possible without basically specialized data infrastructure.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. It's the data aspect is challenging, and especially on Solana. Could you talk about some of the challenges of just trying to be a data provider on Solana?
I mean, first of all, there's a lot of data, and so basically, it's very expensive to have to store all of the data and to be able to make it accessible in a low latency, but still comprehensive way. So that in and of itself is quite difficult. On top of that, there's so much flexibility in terms of how something can be constructed that basically every protocol, whether it's Magic Eden or Orca or Jupiter or any other program on Solana, they're all done differently and they all change all of the time. And so, so I think Magic Eden recently changed something in their contract. And so all of a sudden, all floor prices are off until that's been kind of addressed. So basically there's a lot of data, and there are a lot of important programs and they all change every day. So I think that's probably those are 2 pain points.
With those kind of changing so frequently and new things being added, how hard is it, I guess, to like scale the data and the infrastructure layer?
Yeah, so I think that's, as it exists today, maintaining sort of up to date with what's happening with the protocols doesn't scale in the sense that it's always changing and there's not something you can do to stop it from changing. The good news is that, the keeping up to date with that applies equally to everybody. And so that part of it scales for sure. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but.
No, it makes sense. I think there's just a lot of different challenges from coming from the data. Could you provide like a little bit more clarity on, like, you said it's a lot, and Solana, I think, in our point of view, is really kind of the first iteration or first generation of these like next generation blockchains that are extremely high throughput. And to us, it's kind of a requirement that chains be high throughput to really onboard the masses. But would you be able to provide like some like numbers or anything behind the scenes that you guys have been observing with like Solana, just because it is such high throughput?
Yeah, I mean, we have many petabytes worth of data stored. Is, I guess, maybe the most simple way to frame it. And not only is that stored, but it's also, highly queryable. All kinds of things. So yeah, we've got big AWS bills.
And for like those that don't know what petabytes are, could you put those in context to like terabytes or gigabytes? And then how do you make all that data readable to like the average person or someone that's interested in pulling the data? Yeah,
so I'm non-technical, so I had to Google this. So a petabyte is 1,024 terabytes or 1 million gigabytes.
It's a lot.
So that's there's a lot of it. And then what was the second part of the question?
I guess maybe backing up a little bit, just building the team and finding these kind of technical people to help build Hello Moon and this infrastructure. Could you talk about like assembling the team and kind of your thoughts around it into building like the best infrastructure on Solana?
Yeah, so I think team is important. By the way, I'm non-technical, so I'm much better positioned to talk about teams than I am to talk about petabytes. So I'd spent like, again, almost a decade kind of first investing in companies and then working closely with them post investment. And I guess there were some things that I kind of picked up on. And one of those things was that frequently companies will be built like in an ad hoc kind of scrappy way, which is helpful from going to say 0 to 1, but then makes it very difficult to go from say 1 to 10. So for example, if you have an amazing team of junior developers who build an amazing product, it's kind of painful to, show up one day and say, hey guys, great job building this product that the market loves. Meet your new boss. He's going to tell you how to keep doing it. And so I watched just so many companies struggle with various inflection points in scale. And so we tried to design the company in a way to avoid that. And so what we did is when we were putting together the team, we tried to, at least initially, only hire very, very senior engineers who were excellent at what they did, but also passionate about helping to, be an early driver of turning a startup into a big company. And so we hired, so many engineers, and we did it so quickly. But most of the people who we hired mostly people from Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook, and Google. Most of them were L6s or L7s, so staff or principal level engineers. And that really, I think, was critical to our early success, and certainly has made scaling a lot less painful than I'd anticipated. And so, for example, once we got to the point where, we started to need to have teams and hierarchy and things like that, it wasn't about, how do I find somebody to manage people who built the company, and more about, how do I hire teams underneath, these all-star developers to help leverage them and help get them to scale that they need to be even more effective. And it turns out people are much more excited to hear, hey, we're hiring 3 junior developers to, help support you, as opposed to, hey, you got a new boss who doesn't know anything about the space. And, so that, put a lot of, we're very, very deliberate about that.
I love the approach. Definitely probably saved yourself a lot of headaches towards the end. One thing that I have found, kind of coming from the Web 2 world or Silicon Valley world, previously being at Tesla, some of my coworkers or a lot of them, I would say, even in Silicon Valley at the time, were a little apprehensive to kind of Web3 and blockchain. And especially if you're at one of those bigger tech companies, there's a lot of reasons not to leave from like comp and stock. Did you find it difficult kind of recruiting engineers, especially at these like larger Silicon Valley tech companies, to join you on a crypto startup, or was that like relatively easy?
Honestly, it was actually very easy. It was super easy, and it's funny. The first, well, yeah, it was very easy. And
I'm glad.
And I'll tell you what I did, but I guess the first thing I'd say is that, like startups are bumpy, like it's not an easy road for anybody. Even, there's some there's some businesses and like, I won't name names, but there's one business on Solana that I would guess has to be like top 10 most profitable startups in their first year in all human history. But even then, it's always difficult. And so, the story wasn't, hey, join this startup and you'll make way less money and you'll have way less stock. But if the stock does really well, then you'll do a little bit better than you otherwise would have. That was not the story at all. Because the problem with that is that when things get bumpy, people's spouses say, hey, why are you working 18 hours a day for on this thing? And so we were always, my philosophy was I'd rather have fewer engineers who are, financially comfortable and heavily incentivized and aligned from an equity perspective. And so I guess the first thing that was helpful is that we were competitive on compensation with the FANG companies, et cetera, A. And then B, basically the message was, look, like what's you're going to get paid the same cash and in roughly similar equity, but with a lot more upside. So like if things go well, then, this is 1,000x. And if things don't go well, what's the opportunity cost isn't that big. And then also, I guess, just kind of tried to share what had caused me to be so enthusiastic, and which was basically like, look, there's an opportunity to create, a generational business here. And that those opportunities come around, once every 10, 15, 20 years. So yeah, no, but it was shockingly easy.
I'm glad, because I feel like it can be much more difficult at some points of times, but yeah, the bull markets and like the beginning of kind of the upswing or expansion period in crypto definitely helps. But glad to know that it wasn't too challenging for you and the team.
Yeah, I think there was only one candidate who we really wanted and didn't get, which is probably my fault. But I'd said to him, I think in the first interview, like, look, he was like, can you be competitive on comp? And I was like, yeah, look, we'll do as much or close to what you're currently making, et cetera, et cetera. And then we got to, he'd interviewed with everybody. We were ready to give him an offer. And he was like, yeah, I'm making, $1.5 million a year in cash at Google. And I was like, yeah, sorry, didn't realize you were that senior. So
that's crazy.
Other than that, I think, we call it a 99% hit rate. So
nice. Perfect. Well, maybe jumping back to some of the metrics with what you have built at Hello Moon and building that like core infrastructure data layer. What are some of the key things that excite you? I know you said earlier that you're pretty data driven yourself. What metrics that do you really enjoy tracking and things that you and the team are looking at?
Yeah. It's interesting. It's funny, it changes. It changes based on the meta, right? So unique signers, I think, is an interesting one. I think first signers is also an interesting one to kind of give you a sense for how many different wallets are doing things. We also look closely at NFT volume. So unique wallets buying and selling on the NFT side, but then also just kind of total NFT volume. really kind of as a proxy for what's going on with consumers on Solana. And those numbers actually have been phenomenal. So we were working on a report with Variant, which should be coming out early next week. But basically, the punchline is, even with a temporary move to no fees and no royalties on the NFT side, wash trading only got as high as, I think, 20%, maybe a little bit higher, and currently way less than that. And so basically, what we saw is that,
on Magic Eden.
On Magic Eden, but also across every marketplace.
Okay.
And so basically kind of what we saw on the consumer side for NFTs was that they had their own cycle outside of the Solana news cycle, outside of the price of Sol, outside of FTX, et cetera. And basically, if you look closely at the NFT data, what you see is you see a bunch of people who love buying and selling JPEGs and love hanging out with each other. And there's really, like, the price of Sol or FTX being in the headlines really didn't have a big impact. And to me, that's critical because it shows a community that has staying power. And if you look across other blockchains, you could say there's a similar dynamic on Ethereum, although Ethereum's been a lot more volatile with respect to that than Solana has. But then outside of Solana and Ethereum, like, those communities don't exist. So I think that's huge for Solana. It's great for, riding out the bear market, but I also think it's like an early seed for what's going to be a pretty crazy bull market on Solana, hopefully a few months from now, but at least in the next few years. Definitely.
A couple things there. I mean, I think if you're really plugged in like you are, or I, like, we see these things, we see the community, we can follow the data, but like to the outside world, I mean, and we recently wrote about this, like there seems to be a disconnection. So I guess my question is, how can we better tell like the Solana story? And then following that, why do you think, I mean, Ethereum and Solana specifically have really kind of found their community and found their voice, but these other ecosystems have not?
Yeah, gosh, I'll start with the latter question. You may want to edit this part out. I'll start with the latter question, which is, I think actually very profound. Like, if you're thinking about the staying power of Solana, I think it's super significant. So I don't have exact numbers, but yesterday I saw that SBF had stolen, I think, at least $60 billion from his customers. And so, the headline today is 8 billion. But what people forget is that a year ago, that 8 billion, that's sold at $12 today, but that was sold at $250 a year ago. And so, like, how did Solana get the community that it had? I think there were a few things that happened all at the same time that basically caused lightning to strike, and that created life. And what those lightning strikes were was, first of all, you had SBF basically stealing billions of dollars from his users and using that to invest in ecosystem startups, which is terrible that it happened, but it did happen. And you also had SBF basically market making on Solana, again, with tens of billions of dollars. So not only was there always liquidity, but they would, market make at a loss because it wasn't their money that they were losing, and they were trying to attract even more money. And then at the same time, they were very influential in the space, and so they were running this narrative of Solana as an Ethereum killer. And so basically, like, on the DeFi side, you had the biggest player in crypto running like the treasury of like Google, through the Solana ecosystem every day and giving billions of dollars to people to start businesses in the space. And then I think people forget about the second part all the time. But if you look at the Solana NFT side, at the same time that this was happening in DeFi, there was, I would guess, probably $1 billion worth of equity capital that was raised for Solana NFTs specifically. And so these numbers are not, they're, just from the top of my head, so these are not accurate, but directionally, I think, Aurora raised $100 million of equity capital. I think SolChicks raised $75 million of equity capital. Genesis Go and Shadowy Supercoders raised, I think, about $100 million of equity capital. And there were many other comparable examples of, just huge amounts of money. And it turns out if you have billions and billions of dollars of capital sloshing around, people get interested and communities form, et cetera. And so when you look at these other layer ones that have launched in the last, 6 months or so, sure, they have like a few $100 million in their treasury and things like that. But the reality is, like, it's very difficult to create that initial shockwave that Solana had. And it takes a lot more than a few $100 million in effect. So anyway, I think that was important.
Yeah, it's definitely hard to start a new ecosystem. Even if the tech is better or you're doing different technical trade-offs, it's very hard to build that organic community. And so it is impressive that Solana was able to do it. And I think people, even today, still underestimate the Solana community. And so that's why, again, I really appreciate you and the voice that you have in the ecosystem on Twitter and being able to share some of these data and analytics with Hello Moon, because it's not a story that I think gets told often. But specifically on some of SBF's influence and the market making and all that, some people could consider that kind of a negative and have considered it a negative for the Solana ecosystem, and point to that as being a reason why the Solana community will not be around for the foreseeable future, or prices and the community as a whole will not return to kind of the levels that they were at during the bull market. What do you think about kind of some of those critiques or responses?
Yeah, so I think those are also valid. I think the idea that SBF and FTX was a net negative, I think is also valid. I don't think it'll have any lasting impact. So I guess the way that I think about that is that you had this just explosion of activity that created life, right? And that was really all that was needed. And then after that, this life can develop and emerge and, evolve and mature over time. But the other thing is that SBF and FTX had been in trouble for a long time, and basically had been, really were not participating in the ecosystem other than to effectively be predatory towards all Solana DeFi protocols, and whether it's rinsing out liquidity rewards, whether it's backing somebody and then destroying their token with perps right after it launches. There are all kinds of after this initial explosion. Basically, I would say they were anywhere between a mild net negative to a massive net negative, and certainly weren't contributing anything. And so, I think it would have been difficult to have launched as vibrant of an ecosystem as Solana has today without that scale of capital. But then that basically went away, a long time ago. And in its place, you had a lot of negativity. And you also just had this super unhealthy specter just blocking out the sun in a lot of important ways. And so, we spend a lot of time working with market makers. And one thing that we hear all the time is that people had assumed that, Solana was FTX's playground, and, they had this superior technology and maybe were front running on their own exchange. And so there was no point in getting involved. And so you basically had this uneconomic, predatory capital that was really not there when there wasn't that much of it. And now there's basically, it's almost there's room for other things to grow.
Yeah.
So no, I think another way to think about it is imagine if the most important company in your space was Enron, and the most important thought leader was Bernie Madoff. Like, yeah, it's like awkward and embarrassing when people learn that that's the case, but it's super good for that to go away, and it's now gone away. So
definitely, yeah, no, I do agree, and I mean, we've at Frictionless have written extensively on this, trying to like fight a lot of this FUD, and I mean, it is undeniable that FTX and Sam were pretty pivotal in kind of jumpstarting the ecosystem. But I think to the degree that they were involved towards the end, and as you mentioned, a lot of like the negative or predatory things that they were doing were either they kind of just like got into other ecosystems outside of Solana as well. And then the things that they were doing were definitely not good. And so at least now, as you mentioned, being able to have other players kind of step in and kind of fill the void. And really, I mean, even from the community's aspect, the community stepping in and filling the void, to me, it's very reminiscent of kind of the time where Ethereum in 2017 went from like $1,400 down to $80. And then the community kind of rallied together with builders to actually move the ecosystem forward. And so it's very exciting, and it's cool to watch everybody and the Hello Moon team kind of step up and tell Solana's story from the community aspect, which to me is even more exciting than like a single individual doing that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And the last thing I'd say on that, and this, I want to be very careful with that. So FTX and Alameda made a bunch of venture investments, and they backed a lot of great companies, but they also did a ton of things that no other VC would do. Like they backed a lot of like bullshit companies and did a lot of other bullshit things that like created these confusing signals and like created this almost like zombie effect where like you had these companies that had like all this money from FTX but weren't actually doing anything. But so yeah, I mean, I think on that it's a huge positive to have rinsed that out.
Definitely. Well, maybe moving on kind of from like the FTX Solana saga to some of the other like metrics that you track. Could you talk about, I mean, so you said you kind of, it really depends on like the meta of the ecosystem and pertaining to like what individual metrics that you are following. But on a high level, could you share, I mean, you have DeFi metrics, you have NFT metrics, you even do, I mean, the unique addresses on like the social layer. Can you talk a little bit about each and like why you've decided to like include or pull those metrics from the chain?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think for NFTs, volume is very important. And likewise for DeFi, I think swap volume is also very important. So we look very closely at how much swap volume is there every day on Solana, how many unique wallets are swapping, how spread out is that across the various protocols. So we look super closely at that. We also look closely at things like order book depths and basically like liquidity that's being made available on chain, and also basically like how active are market makers and where are they making markets, things like that. So we look very closely at those, and again, like it's a mixed story, right? Or like you think it's interesting the way you think about it. So Alameda used to do a huge amount of market making on Serum, and they would just like spam, like crazy volume that would never get filled and things like that. And so, one thing that I look at closely, and it's funny because this is a metric that's like gotten a lot of hate on Solana from or a lot of hate on Twitter from some people who aren't perfectly informed, but I look closely at this total value moved on chain metric, which basically looks at all transfers that are happening on chain. And so, pre FTX, FTX was just doing something like some crazy. It was like $500 billion or like $250 billion a day of spamming orders on Serum. And again, most of these orders weren't met. And so this is not economic activity, but it is kind of on-chain liquidity at a specific price point that, can be hit or not. And what happened is the day that FTX, or the day that like John Ray or whatever took over, that basically drops to zero for Alameda. And I kind of look at that as opportunity for other people. And so we've seen those numbers kind of slowly tick up. And again, we also speak with a number of market makers and work pretty closely with a good number of them. And, it feels like there's a lot of room to, I mean, for example, like you can do arbitrage trading on Solana today for things that are like, 5 or 6 seconds or, even longer old, which is crazy. So yeah, anyway, kind of a roundabout answer to the question, but
makes sense. I guess on the DeFi side of things, has definitely slowed down or been much smaller than it once was. Are there any things that you're seeing from like the metric side that was like kind of making you excited again for like the ecosystem?
Yeah, well, I mean, and this is like kind of painful to say, but the numbers are down from where it was, but also those were fake numbers. That was like Saber doing, that was like, if you add Saber and FTX, like you get like a shocking amount of like fraud and manipulation of numbers and things like that. And so like, did that, it's unclear if that ever even happened. I mean, like the fraud part happened, but underneath it, it's hard to say how much, this would be almost impossible to delineate, but like, if there was some way to like peel back all of that, like maybe even like DeFi has been up into the right, I don't know. But so we looked closely at, like, there were a bunch of amazing DeFi protocols on Solana that I think are kind of leading the way today and that are going to be like breeding grounds for new protocols. So one example of that would be Orca. So Orca has like basically whirlpools, I think, are this crazy opportunity for people to make a lot of money placing liquidity. So anyway, I guess if you take a step back, we look closely at the health of Orca, we look closely at the health of Jupiter, and like basically what you see is crazy innovation from those teams. You see a lot of volume. You see so we see all kinds of exciting things from there. And I think what's happening with OpenBook is very exciting. What's happening with Ellipsis is very exciting. And so I guess with DeFi, it's less about the numbers and more about the teams in the future. And we're excited about that.
Yeah. No, we're big fans of Orca and what they're doing as well. They've been around for some time. I initially met their team at the first Breakpoint event in 2021 and was super impressed. And they definitely continue to iterate super quickly. So there are a lot of parties that we're excited to watch and continue to kind of move the ball forward in 2023. One thing that you are also working on is kind of a little bit of alpha here, is a new product launch. And could you tell us a little bit more about like what you're working on and what will be launching fairly soon? Or by the time this comes out, have already launched?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, as I mentioned kind of earlier in the conversation, we're best known for our website, but the reality is, only a small fraction of our engineering resources go into that. And it's the only part of our business that we're kind of not monetizing today. And so basically we've been working very closely with a bunch of protocols on Solana, news organizations, protocols that are not, that are big on ETH, but want to be on Solana, and even other L1s and L2s who want to learn about Solana. But we've been doing all that in stealth mode. And so historically, you've only been able to like engage with the actual Hello Moon products, if you are one of those major protocols or basically kind of a major business. And so what we're going to be rolling out next week, hopefully Monday, hopefully Tuesday, hopefully early next week, is basically going to be like a self-service version of those product suites that anybody can use. And so if you want to build your own version of HelloMoon.io, we'll make that very easy. But I think more importantly, if you want to build anything else, or if you want to have access to the same kind of data infrastructure and data technology that all these other large businesses have had, we're basically opening it up. Some of it will be no code, some of it will require code, and so excited to kind of share that with the community to help launch kind of the next wave of businesses on Solana.
That's amazing. Yeah, I feel like in some sense, like on Ethereum, for example, like a lot of people go to like Dune Analytics and try to pull like specific data and use that data to help fight the FUD. And so as much as you can kind of arm the degens, so to speak, it is super helpful and extremely helpful for the community. So congrats on the upcoming launch. I know when I was shipping products, it was always a little stressful, kind of crossing your T's and dotting your I's right before the product launch, but wishing you all the best and excited for that. Is there any so you said some of it will be kind of like a no code solution. Some of it will be like a little bit more engineering heavy. Could you talk about like the non-coding solution and like some of the product or the features that you'll have there?
Yeah. So basically, and again, this has been tough for me because I'm like tough product for me to be involved with because I'm not a developer, and so I really can't use any of this. But so basically, you'll be able to point and click, and if you want to get if you want to have like a Discord bot that says Smart Money is buying Solana Monkey Business, you can point and click, and with like 3 clicks, you should be able to set that up. So I guess for like the, even like on the consumer side, that's, hopefully pretty interesting. But then also like if you're running a protocol and you want to track like, are liquidations happening, you can point and click and get that too. And nice. So it should be, hopefully pretty comprehensive.
That's awesome. Amazing. Very cool. Maybe jumping back a little bit to, at what point in time did you start Hello Moon? And I guess from that like beginning experience to kind of some of your thoughts being a founder in the ecosystem, what were like the large lessons that you have learned from like building a crypto team, especially kind of over the past couple of years with like the bull market and now the bear market, like operational excellence in like Web3?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I think the first thing that probably the most important thing that I learned. So I've been thinking about entrepreneurship for a while, and I'd always thought of it as something that I kind of had to build toward and had to have experience doing XYZ before that was something that I could do, and I think that was wrong. And so I think that if I would have founded Hello Moon 5 years ago or 6 years ago, I think that probably we would have done just as well. And so I guess to any aspiring entrepreneurs out there, there's something to be said for, getting experience, but probably the best way to get experience is just doing what you want to do. And so the biggest lesson I would say is that, it's out there. And if you come up with a plan that makes sense to you and feels achievable to you, and then you go achieve it, then you'll have done what you wanted to do. Right. So first of all, I would say that, second of all, I'd say it's very important to listen to your users. And so before you've launched the product, there are various ways you can do that. It obviously gets much easier when you have actual users. But so listening to your users and understanding what do they want, what are their pain points, it's it's very intuitive, and it's kind of common sense, but definitely is very important. Something else I would say is that you really want to be thoughtful about economies of scale, and you want to be thoughtful about what scales and what doesn't. And any startup business is going to have to do lots of things that don't scale, but figuring out what does scale is very important. And so I think probably the most pressing example of that would be going cross-chain. And so, supporting multiple chains. And the reality is that that's a very complicated business maneuver. And you get diseconomies of scale, I think, for everything other than if you're building a pitch book, where you get huge economies of scale. And so when you're thinking about, or I guess kind of like another way to think about it is that when you're thinking about a business, like, you don't necessarily want to be, like if your total addressable market is, say, $200 million and you have $10,000 of revenue, maybe you should be more focused on trying to capture some of that $100 million of existing addressable market, as opposed to opening up what you're doing so that you have, all of a sudden $300 million of addressable market, if that makes sense. There's a few things that have stood out. This kind of goes without saying, but as well, but like as it relates to kind of curating the team, if you have people who, and it feels like they're not fully contributing or they're not carrying their weight in the same way that other people are, that's probably the case, and you don't have to wait, 8 months, for it to be, definitively proven also.
Yeah. No, definitely some good advice there. One thing that I definitely agree with, like doing what you want to do initially. I think a lot of people try to take like the circuitous path where they're like, oh, I want to be a founder, but I need to join this company and this company and this company, or I want to be an investor, but I need to do this, this, and this. But I fully would reiterate kind of just jumping into it and learning. You definitely learn a lot and can be overwhelming, but I think you learn quicker and you get to the point of what you actually want to do faster as well. Maybe on the point of a couple times, I think you mentioned just being a non-technical founder, but you've really kind of reiterated the fact of building a awesome team and having them all aligned towards like a single vision and building like a really awesome product. What would your words of like wisdom, or what have you learned from being like a non-technical founder in the space, and advice to others, non-technical people that want to get involved into like the crypto industry or build a product?
Yeah, that's a great question. And let me just kind of caution that despite being a non-technical founder, I did have almost a decade of experience of hiring and maintaining teams in software. So I would flag that. But I mean, look, at the end of the day, if the CEO of a company is writing code, then that's not like the job of a CEO. And so I really wouldn't think of it as too big of a barrier. I think being a technical founder actually cuts in both ways. I think going from like 0 to like 0.01, it's very helpful to be a technical founder, because you can, build the prototype of the product or something to that effect. But then after that, you have to watch out, because if you don't pull yourself out of that, doing, manual labor, it's going to be very difficult to build your business. And so, yeah, I guess what I'd say is if you're a non-technical founder, it certainly has not been a burden for me. And so what I'd say is focus on hiring only excellent people. So one thing that was huge for us is that we hired, like, the first mean, every engineer we hired was amazing, but the first 5 engineers we hired were just mind-blowingly amazing. And that made my life easy because I didn't have to worry, like, is this person we're interviewing, are they good technically? Because my engineers would not stand it if they weren't, and so like that, like, I think if you're non-technical, it's important that you get your first few technical hires right, because that sets the tone for everything else. And actually, a question you asked earlier was how do we recruit all of these institutional type engineers to Solana? And sometimes when I would do a first interview, people would be a little skeptical, and so I would just put them, like, the next interview, I just have it be with our most senior engineer, and they were never skeptical again. Like, it was kind of like, oh, well, that guy, like, if that guy was, a principal engineer at Google and doing what he was doing, if this is exciting to him, maybe it should be exciting to me too. So, yeah.
Nice. Yeah. No, it's, I think all valuable insights. There's no perfect path. And I think everybody's story is kind of unique in the fact that, like, how they journey into blockchain, how they ultimately kind of go against the grain and ultimately decide to build something. And so I think it's fascinating kind of coming from that operational background, but still having that tech sense and being able to build a company. I think it's important to share with others as well. Maybe kind of wrapping up the podcast, going into 2023, or we're in 2023, but what are the things that you were looking forward to for this year? Anything on, like, the metric side, anything on, like, the community? What gets you excited?
Yeah. So, I'm just so excited for time to pass. We, like, are such big believers in the future of crypto and the future of Solana that the more time passes, I think the more established the ecosystem will be. But for me, I guess I'm most excited about two things. So I'm most excited about royalties becoming enforceable again on Solana. So that's huge. Before royalties went away, there was something like $500,000 a day of cash that was being distributed to thousands of NFT teams, several NFT marketplaces, and that is incredibly important for an ecosystem. Like, it turns out that it's very difficult to run a business with no revenue, and so getting royalties back in place, I think, is going to be huge for the ecosystem. A, and I think B. If you look at Solana DeFi today, like, if you want to build a Solana DeFi protocol and launch a token and get traction immediately, like, it's a lot easier to do that if you're an NFT collection, right? You can launch in Magic Eden, you can leverage their installed base, you can leverage their credibility. You're definitely going to sell out. You're definitely going to get hype, but there's no kind of equivalent for DeFi, and so. One thing I've been kind of evangelizing among my friends who run DeFi protocols is, like, hey, let's get a launch pad together for DeFi where, new teams can launch and get traction quickly, get, interest quickly. Obviously, like 95% of NFT projects fail. I assume 95% of these projects would fail too. But the point is that the 5% that remain are hugely valuable. So I think if Solana can get royalties down and can find a way to wear down a path for new DeFi businesses to launch, I think we'll flip Ethereum. So neither is easy, but I think the impact on the market will be huge.
Yeah, I am definitely excited for time just to pass as well. I think people, in my point of view, really don't understand how Solana is architectured, or the design and the architecture, and how advanced it is to especially Ethereum and these other blockchain ecosystems. It's really kind of night and day difference. And I'm excited, that people use it. I think that's, like, the biggest thing that gets me excited. There is such a vibrant community building back kind of like a strong DeFi ecosystem. and getting people using blockchains, because it really is kind of, in my opinion, the coolest thing that's going on in tech. Like self-custody, being able to have the technology be global, it's fascinating, and Solana really enables that for the masses. And I really appreciate everything that you and the team are doing at Hello Moon, being able to provide that data, showcase that, unique signers, all the things that are going on with NFTs, all the things that are going on with DeFi. It's extremely important, and you're really playing like a critical role in the ecosystem. And so really appreciate you coming on the podcast, sharing a lot of your wisdom that you've learned from growing a team to building a company, and all the things that it takes to be successful in Web3. So thank you so much, Walker.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Perfect. Well, thank you again, and excited to watch what happens in 2023.
Likewise.